Shalom uvracha from Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. We have a special privilege to study together Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers. These weeks we study Pirkei Avot the entire year, but these are the weeks where the entire Jewish people, in almost all communities, are studying Pirkei Avot, so we feel connected on some level. Of course, Pirkei Avot is a study for all seasons, even though there's a custom to read it in some communities between Pesach and Shavuot, other communities between Pesach and Rosh Hashanah. Be that as it may, we are studying this evening Chapter 2, Mishnah 6, Part 2. Chapter 2, Mishnah 6, Part 2, Perek Bet, Mishnah Vav, and this is our second class in Mishnah Vav. We are studying together the teachings of one of the greatest rabbis ever. His name is Hillel. One of the major teachers here in Pirkei Avot. Tonight he begins by saying, "V'lo habaishan lamed." V'lo habaishan lamed. A person who is very shy, a person who is very bashful, will not successfully be able to study. It could be it's true of all study. I think it's fair to assume that Hillel's emphasis is about study of Torah, although it probably is true of study of all areas of wisdom. Lo habayishan lamed. Now this is an interesting teaching because in a certain sense we're always encouraging people to be shy. Our nation is considered one of the trademarks of our nation is Bayishanim, Rahamanim, Bayishanim. We are, bashful people, humble people. We're not so loud. We're not so expressive. And here it's saying, well, there is a time for a quietude. There is a time to be shy and ashamed. But there's a time that if you behave in such a way, you'll be defeating the purpose of the pursuit that you're supposed to be involved in. And that is one of the greatest pursuits is the study of Torah. So if someone is a student of Torah, and I hope that we're all students of Torah on some level, it's so fascinating that in Hebrew, when you want to compliment a great scholar, you don't say he's a great teacher. Often you say he's a great Talmid, Chacham, he's a great student, a wise student, because we're all students, we're always studying. If a person is too shy, if a person is too ashamed to ask a question. Now this happens in many institutions, in many classes. There are people sitting there and they don't really grasp what the teacher is teaching. Now they could easily raise their hand and say, "Could you please explain it? I don't really understand it." But they're afraid that if they do that, that everyone else in the group will know that, they didn't understand the teaching. So maybe they're on a lower level than the other students. Now, often what's happening is that no one understands it, and everybody's thinking that everybody else will look down at them. That could happen. I think the general teaching of Hillel is, don't be embarrassed. There are so many things that every person has countless forms of knowledge and wisdom that are not known to them. So what are you ashamed of? Before anybody knew anything, any bit of information that anybody ever learned, before they learned it, they didn't understand it. And just because it takes you a little longer to learn it, or just because you didn't understand the explanation, that's not a reason to be embarrassed. I always share with my children that when I was in 4th grade, my great teacher was teaching us how to use a dictionary. We were all instructed to buy dictionaries. We came to school and it was an entire lesson on dictionary usage. Unfortunately, I did not understand the teaching. I did not know how to look up words in the dictionary. I knew more or less the alphabet by 4th grade, I'm sure. But I couldn't figure out how it works. And every time the teacher asked for, is there anyone who needs me to repeat it, or does everyone understand it? I didn't say a word. I didn't say a word. I came home that night, in a great state of confusion. And I remember my mother, of blessed memory, saying to me, "What's the matter, Mordechai?" I said, "Well, I don't know. Everybody knows how to use the dictionary. I don't know how to use the dictionary." And she said, "Did you ask the teacher?" I said, I was too embarrassed. I was too embarrassed to ask the teacher. And I believe it was at that point that my mother taught me, "Al titosh torati mechav." My mother taught me, well, that's not our tradition. Our tradition is that whenever you go through school, whenever you go to a class, whenever you go to a shiur, anytime you hear someone teaching, lo habayishan lameid. A person who is embarrassed will never study. And Baruch Hashem, guess what? I learned how to use a dictionary. My mother taught me how to use a dictionary at home, and till today. Baruch Hashem, I think every time I look up a word in the dictionary, my imam is with me in the dictionary pursuit. But perhaps my great teacher would have been there as well if I wasn't so inhibited to ask questions. There is no such thing as a stupid question. There is no such thing as a silly question. What are you embarrassed? So you don't understand. So does your teacher understand everything? Does your rabbi understand everything? Does your rebbitzin ever does it? Did they know it? But they were born knowing everything. They also learn, and they also till today there are so many areas that they don't have it clear either. So if we could just break this tendency of bayishanut in the wrong place, of being ashamed when there's no reason to be ashamed. If a person maybe slept through the class, maybe they were. Today there's a real problem with people who have computers or iPods or iPads or cell phones. Some people constantly texting or people constantly sending emails. Okay, if that's the case, so it's not a problem you didn't understand. You just didn't even listen. You weren't even there. I'm not sure you shouldn't say, "Could you please repeat it?" But this fear of being looked down upon, of pretending to understand when one doesn't understand, Hillel says this is self-defeating. The person may get away with it for the moment, like they're nodding. Oh yes, I understand. I understand the great teaching of the great. I don't understand anything. Lo habayishan lamed. The rabbis teach. There's a very interesting pasuk in the book of Proverbs. For those interested, it's in Proverbs 30, chapter 30, verse 32. Mishlei Perek Lamid, pasuk Lamid Bet. I'm not going to discuss the simple interpretation of the text, but rather the rabbinic reading in several places, both in the Midrash as well as in the Gemara. It's found in 63b, the very end of Masechet Brachot, Samach Gimel Amud Bet. It's found in the Midrash in Bereshit Rabbah, Parsha Pei Aleph. It says there in Mishlei, Im Navalta B'Hitnaseh. Im Navalta B'Hitnaseh. I should read the Gemara. The Gemara teaches that if a person Kol HaMenabel Atzmo Navalta, if a person is embarrassed because they have to express their questions to their instructor, to their teacher, Navalta, you feel lowly, you feel ashamed, but you did it anyway, right? Navalta, and maybe people looked at you, well, you really don't understand something so basic, so Navalta, B'Hitnaseh, you will be elevated. Kol HaMenabel Atzmo Al Divrei Torah Sofo Lehitnaseh. At this point, you're in a low state because you think, and I want to say this is a mistake. I said it before, and I'm repeating it. It's a mistake to think that you're the only one who doesn't understand. In most cases, it's not true. The other person is also too embarrassed to ask. But Im Navalta Kol HaMenabel Atzmo Al Divrei Torah, says Rashi in his commentary on Masechet Brachot, Sheshoel L'Rabo Kol Sefekotav, who's not embarrassed, who's not shy, who's not ashamed to ask his teacher, his Rav, his Rebbe, Kol Sefekotav, all of his questions, all of his doubts. And this can be doubts in understanding a lecture. This can be doubts in understanding of the scriptural text. This can be doubts in understanding Mishnah or Gemara. But it also can be doubts of religious questions. Many people walk around with religious questions about doubts in faith, about proofs, indications for the evidence for the existence of God or validity of Torah. They're embarrassed. They're shy. Who knows what the rabbi will think of me if I ask him to prove the existence of God? Who knows what the rabbi will? If I say, well, how do I know that the Torah is true? So Rashi says, beautiful words here. Sheshoel l'rabo kol sfeikotav. Any question he has, any doubt. V'af al pi sheyesh bahem shechaverav mal'igim alav. Sometimes it can happen, God forbid, that some of his colleagues, some of his friends, start making fun of him. He doesn't care. Navalta. He's willing to be a naval. He's willing to act in a way that other people think is foolish. Im navalta. If you did go through this, behit naseh. Eventually, you're going to be the leader. You're going to be the ruler. You're going to be the one who rules in the world of Torah because you will have amassed such great wisdom. Lo abayishan lameid. Lo abayishan. But if you get over your bayishan to it, Rashi says, that the person who is involved in such activity will eventually be elevated, will be elevated to the point where others will look up to him and ask him questions. So it's extremely important not to be too shy. Hillel continues. That's from the point of view of the student. And then he says, V'lo hakapidan milamed. Someone who's very strict. Makpid kapidan. That's not the place to be so strict and in ruling. I feel that maybe Hillel himself had these traits. Remember, we learned many times at Pirkei Avot that these rabbis didn't merely teach these teachings, but Hillel was a great teacher. Hillel was a great student. The Gemara teaches in Masechet Yoma, page 35b, Lamed Hey. In Yoma, the Gemara teaches about how Hillel was a very poor man. Very poor man. And he would chop wood, and he would gather wood. It's a fascinating passage to read. And it's an encouragement to all the people who are not yet financially stable. May they have at least the blessings of Hillel, I hope more. Hillel used to go and sell the wood, and half he would use for his family expenses every day, and half he would have to pay. Hillel would have to pay for the entrance fee for the Academy of Study, some kind of tuition, And that and the Gemara describes there how one time he could not raise enough money. Yeah, right. It's great. A cold one, but he could not raise enough money to enter the yeshiva. Now, most people would be so embarrassed to climb up to the roof to listen to the lecture through the what's it called, the skylight, through the skylight, right? Who would do such a thing? Who knows? Somebody will see me climbing up, and Hillel is sitting there. Hillel, you know who Hillel became? He became the leader of the Jewish people. Im navalta behit naseh. He will be elevated. He was elevated because navalta. Im navalta atzmachal divrei Torah. Who sits and listens through a window on top? Through a sky. What are the great teachings of Shemaiah and Avtalyon? He wants to hear the teachings of his great rabbis. And maybe he's the one who teaches about Lo Habayishan Lamed, because he himself fulfilled it. He is the one who taught about Lo Hakapidan Milamed, because he knew how to teach. He was one of the greatest teachers in Jewish history. And the rabbis teach that a teacher, a Rav, a Rebbe, is supposed to be ever so sensitive, ever so kind, ever so generous, ever so polite, and ever so patient. Ever so patient in dealing, ever so patient in dealing with his or her students. There is a famous teaching in Masechet Eruvin, 54b, about one of the greatest rabbis that I've ever read about in the Gemara. His name is Rabbi Pirkei Avot. And Rabbi Pirkei Avot is the example par excellence of patience. Says the Gemara that Rabbi Pirkei Avot had a certain student who didn't understand the lesson once, who didn't understand the lesson twice, nor 5 times, nor 50 times, nor 100 times. But he kept repeating it 400 times. I don't know if it's literal 400. The Maharatz Chayot, in his introduction to the Talmud, and introduction to Agadah, he explains that some of the numbers are not necessarily to be taken literally. It means many, many times. But if you want to take it literally, you're welcome to do so. 400 times Rabbi Pirkei had to repeat his lecture to the student. And he had the patience to do so. I believe it was in the writings. I never understood, like, who doesn't understand something 400 times? It's even if it's exaggerated. I believe it was Rabbi Aharon Soloveitchik, Zichrono Livracha, one of the great rabbis. I had the privilege of hearing some shiurim from Rabbi Aharon Soloveitchik. I believe it's in one of his writings that he writes that maybe Rabbi Pirkei used to teach people who were mentally challenged in certain areas. He says, where do we find, I hope I'm quoting Rav Soloveitchik. If it's not Rav Soloveitchik, it was someone of that period. I couldn't find it when I was preparing today's class. I think it's Rabbi Soloveitchik's writing. I think Rabbi Aaron said, who was teaching people with Down syndrome tendencies in the time of the Gemara? Maybe Rabbi Pirkei. Maybe he was an expert teacher for very slow students, for students who found it very difficult. May all the Down patients, may all the Down syndrome people be able to reach highest level of maximum accomplishments in their lives, and the Jewish people throughout the world. Rabbi Pirkei had to teach over and over and over and over and over again. Most people just give up, right? Okay, I said it already. No, can you repeat a lesson 400 times? Yeah. Some people couldn't do it 40 times. I think some people even 4 times. I said it already. Like, leave me alone. I explained it already. Like, what do you want? Repeat it, and repeat it, and repeat it. The Gemara says also that Rabbi Pirkei, for all kinds of reasons, lived a very long life. I mean, I guess this is one of the contributing factors. The Gemara discusses Rabbi Pirkei. Lo hakapedan melamed. In an interesting twist of the story, the Gemara says that one time he taught 400 times to the student, and the student couldn't grasp it. Now it seemed automatic, 400 times that he gets it, and he couldn't understand after 400 times. So the Gemara teaches in Eruvin, he said, why is it the manish tana? Halayla is that what we call it? Like what is why? Every day you grasp it after 400 times, and tonight not so, right? So the student said, well, I'll tell you, in the middle of the lesson, they told the Rav that he has to leave to a certain mitzvah. He has to take care of a certain matter. Somebody came in, I guess, in the middle and addressed the rabbi, Rabbi Pirkei. I told him he's going to have to be leaving. He said, ever since I heard you saying that you're going to be leaving, I didn't know exactly when I couldn't concentrate and I couldn't grasp it. Well, and he repeats the teaching. Listen to the ultimate teacher of this Mishnah. Lo hakapedan melamed. And Rabbi Pirkei says to him, you didn't understand it today. He said, no, I couldn't follow it. And he repeats the teachings. How many times? 400 more times. 400 more times, right? Wow. I think this is a required reading for every teacher, and for every Rav, and for every Rebbe, and for every Mehanech, and for every Mehanecha. Do you have the patience to teach? Lo hakapedan melamed. Sometimes it comes naturally to some people, sometimes it doesn't. And what's necessary is to somehow balance the teaching of Hillel with the teaching of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, because there is another side to teaching. I don't want to mention specifically any great rabbis' names because some of the stories are difficult to explain. But I heard about certain great rabbis who were very strict in their class. One great rabbi that I'm thinking of blessed memory, someone told me he used to sit in his class and he was afraid that the rabbi would call on him. Because if the rabbi called on him, maybe he would be, embarrassed, or he wouldn't live up to this. So, what about lo hakapedan melamed? What about the fact that in Masechet Ketuvot, on page 103b, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi teaches, Zrok mara b'talmidim. Let them sit there and cast fear upon fear. Is that job? that jive with lo hakapadan milameh? Let them sit there, and shudder when the teacher. So there's a literature, there's a vast literature on trying to explain the two sources. Is there a contradiction between the two sources? Could you be a lo hakapadan milameh? Can you still do zrok mara b'talmidim? They'll be in awe of you. They'll be so afraid. That maybe they'll sit and concentrate. They'll sit and concentrate in such a great way that maybe the Maharsha in Ketuvot, says you have to be careful if you're a teacher, how much to smile and how much to, I don't know, you need this balance. You need this balance of, I can't be too friendly, because then maybe they won't understand there's a teaching going on, or a teacher. But I can't be very unfriendly, or I can't be very exacting. And I think this is one of the greatest challenges of any great teacher. If you've ever met great Rabbanim, if you've ever met great Rabbaniyot, if you've ever met great Mechanachim, or great Mechanachot, they somehow know how to balance Zrok Mara B'Talmidim. There's a certain seriousness. This is not a free-for-all. You just can't do what you want here. We're studying. And the teaching of Hillel, of Lo HaKapadan Melamed, could it be that it depends, Maybe sometimes a person has to be strict if he or she feels that they're being taken advantage of, that they're just being disrespected. Maybe Lo HaKapadan Melamed means with people who are interested in teaching. Many, many answers have been given. The rabbis teach in certain places, but how you have to balance the smol docha v'yamid mikarevet, pushing away with your left hand and pulling closer with your right hand. We hope that all of the teachers in the world, especially those people teaching Torah, will be able to encourage their students. Lo habayashan lamed. Maybe it would be great if every teacher would say to every student, no matter what's bothering you, no matter what you want to talk about, no matter what you want to ask me, there's no topic in the world from A to Z that you can't ask. There's no question that I will put down. Ask me anything. Lo habayashan lamed. If there's anything that I could share with you, if that needs instruction, and maybe every Rab and every Rabbanit and every Moreh and every Morah should learn Lo HaKapadan Melamed. Remember, it's difficult. It's difficult to learn from anybody. Be patient with your students. Don't be too exacting. Don't be too strict, because if you are, you will not be able to successfully teach the beautiful words of Torah. We do hope that we'll be able to, each one in his or her own way, fulfill the great teachings. Thank you so much for listening.